gets the full savings under the salary cap there. It's going to come down to money. And when we were talking about Sheldon Richardson and Anthony Barr and their free agent prospects, Zimmer talked about Barr, almost romantically there, to use that word again, but saying that, hey, he was my first ever pick as a head coach, first ever draft pick. And, I would love to keep him. But he also admitted, hey, if this is a guy that's going to get $18 million in free agency, it's over for us. And so they're going to have to make some hard decisions. In my mind, even if they make a bunch of moves to save salary, restructure some contracts, perhaps release or trade some guys, they're still probably going to have to choose between Sheldon Richardson and Anthony Barr. And, Barr may end up looking at the situation and going, I can make more as a 3-4 outside linebacker that's rushing the passer quite a bit more than what he was doing in Minnesota. So I tend to think that probably Anthony Barr is gone. Maybe Sheldon Richardson is gone as well.
Yeah, it's starting to sound that way. And Barr, it makes so much sense, doesn't it? Barr plays for 3-4 where he can really use his, he can start piling up some sacks, which is where you get the big money, which is where you get the big recognition. He's a nice piece for Zimmer, but I just don't think he's produced enough. But we've talked a lot about Barr over the time. Kicker wars. What now? Are we going to have a kicker coach on the staff this year?
Yeah, it's interesting. Today, Zimmer just brought that up on his own. He was asked about kickers, but he said he's been thinking about it a lot. And listening to him talk today, both in his podium stand-up press conference and on side sessions, he has been thinking about his approach to kickers. I think, he realizes, I certainly got the feeling that he believes he was a little too impatient, perhaps, with Daniel Carlson. He certainly didn't want to walk away from Lambeau last year with a tie. And it's clear that still is kind of stuck in his craw. But I think he realizes, okay, that the kicker we have on the roster currently, whoever that's going to be for 2019, I can't let everything that's happened in the past with kickers, with Blair Walsh, to a lesser extent, Kai Forbath, and, Daniel Carlson, to dictate how I treat a kicker this year, whether that's a rookie and their new special teams coach, Marwan Malouf, said he's open to drafting a kicker, or whether that's a veteran guy that they bring in through free agency. They can't let everything that's happened in the past really dictate what they do in the future. But having a kicking coach is something Zimmer talked quite a bit about. He said Malouf is open to it, where they would just have a guy that all your job is to do is look for any inconsistencies or technique flaws that may be going on with the kicker. And to me, it's a very fine line, because you start breaking down every little nuance of a kicker's motion, his leg, his plant foot, everything that goes into that. And I think you can end up flooding them with too much information. So I think it's going to be up to whoever this kicking coach may be to decide, okay, let's just let this guy go. He's kicking well. We don't need to get into too much minutia of the kicking motion. Or, okay, he's starting to struggle. We got to make sure that this is the same as it was when he was kicking well, and get him back on track. So to me, it's kind of a dicey job. You may be busy at times, and you may have to really back off and just kind of let the kicker go when he's doing well.
Yeah, I haven't gotten my head around whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. I guess bottom line is these franchises are so rich that if you think that guy can help a guy make one or two game-winning kicks, then it's absolutely worth it. I just don't know if the guy actually would help a good kicker, or whether good kickers just kind of they're their own psychiatrists. Let's talk about the offensive line briefly and wrap the show up. I want to thank Tony Hoaglund, Hoaglund, your State Farm agent in Champlin. As I always tell you, Tony handles my insurance, so I know he's good. He handles Michael Russo's insurance, and you know what Michael's like. If Michael's working with him, the guy must be good. Tony Hoaglund, Hoaglund.
Hey, Minnesota sports fans. This is your local State Farm agent, Tony Hoaglund. I need you all to ask yourselves this question. If you're in an at-fault car accident and you are sued for $700,000, how much of that $700,000 will my current insurance company pay? If you are unsure or can't answer all $700,000, you need to give us a call. State Farm has been number one in car insurance since World War II and number one in homeowners insurance since 1964. For a no-obligation review of your current policies, call us at 763-421-4900 or check out our website at www.champlininsurance.com.
All right, let's wrap it up by talking about offensive line developments and thoughts.
Yeah, well, really the newsiest thing to come out of it was when I asked Spielman about Nick Easton, and he said he thinks he's going to be medically cleared very soon. So he doesn't view, Easton's neck injuries and surgery last year as being anything that's going to hurt him in free agency. Now, does that mean that the Vikings are going to look to re-sign him? I think they will. But at what price? How do other teams view Easton and his 2017 season, which I think was solid. And with all the offensive line problems around the NFL, solid is pretty good in a free agent market. So I think he'll draw some interest if he hits free agency, but I certainly expect that the Vikings will at least explore re-signing him before free agency comes around.
And with the position flexibility that some of these guys have, you have Elflein can play guard or center. Easton can play guard or center. We've heard rumors that Reif might move inside. Maybe he can move guard. Is that a good thing as this team goes through free agency and the draft, that they can just take the best offensive lineman available and they can fit other people around that person?
Well, Zimmer also made it really clear today that, I think he's still a bit irritated by some of the pushback that the Vikings got last year when they drafted Mike Hughes. He said, everybody wanted us to draft a certain offensive lineman. And you can pretty safely assume that was Will Hernandez, that he just wasn't a fit for what we wanted. And so, he
blocking,
athletic guy that can get out and move. Will Hernandez is, I think, more of a road grader type, but it's also interesting that, okay, so who drafted Will Hernandez? It was the Giants and Pat Shurmur, So I think a lot of what the Vikings wanted to do last year was based off of what Pat Shurmur did in 2017. So, I do think that at some point you have to say, is this guy just a good player? But they are very stuck on, we have to have guys that fit our scheme. And Hernandez wasn't going to fit their scheme in their estimation. So what they're looking for is guys that can really get out and move, that can do a lot of zone blocking. So I think that's going to dictate what they look for, whether that's in free agency or the draft. But, there are a ton of offensive linemen in the first, second, and third rounds that have a lot of different variety, a lot of potential to be very flexible, whether they are tackle guard types or guard center types. So, there are a lot of options for the Vikings. I'll be shocked if they don't draft an offensive lineman in the first round, but it could be one of these guys that, there are several around that 18 pick that the Vikings have that, are tackles and tackles only. There are a few that are kind of in that projected, they could play tackle, they could play guard. Maybe they start at guard initially and can move out to tackle as a need arises later in their career or in a few years. But I I will be pretty shocked if the Vikings go down that line again where, they get to number 18 and they just don't see a guy that's worth spending that pick that fits their system. I think that, they realize if this offense is going to take off, they feel that they have a good quarterback. They feel like they've got the weapons with Dalvin Cook and Stephon Diggs, Adam Thielen. They've got to be able to protect, and they've got to be able to open up holes for Cook. I'm going to be shocked if they don't go with an offensive lineman in the first round this year.
And I hope they don't pass up a really good player because he's not exactly the kind of player they want. Don't pass up a guy who might be an all-pro for a guy who just is a guy who fits what your preconceived notion is.
Well, and here's the other problem with doing something like that. So, we started out the show talking about Zimmer's contract, and, so if they're, as a general manager, your job has to be, draft for the team for not only, as a first round pick, the first 5 years of his career, but, a guy that can be very good throughout his career. Well, let's say something does happen on the other end of the spectrum where the team doesn't make the playoffs again. The Wilfs are getting tired of that scenario and Mike Zimmer's no longer around. Well, that means you're getting in a new head coach, which is probably going to be a new offensive system that you're running. Well, now all of a sudden that guy who could be a Pro Bowl talent, all-pro talent, maybe he fits a little bit closer to what you want and can still be, a very good player in any system.
Yeah, absolutely. Good stuff, Tim. Last thing for you. Once again, thanks to Twill in the United Galleria, Mississippi Pub, Beaver Island Brewing, FixologyRepair.com, and Tony Hoaglund, your State Farm agent and champion. Wrap it up by just telling me about your combine experience. What's it like to be there?
Well, I think people have the preconceived notion that, as reporters, what we do is we go to the combine and we watch all the workouts and make all these grand assessments about how good a player is, how fast he is, how strong he is, all this stuff. And that's not really the reality. The workouts are, yes, they're televised and they're there for the coaches and that sort of thing. From a media standpoint, you're trying to get to know the players and, which guys, their pasts, their experiences, what they're like as people. For the teams, it's really the greatest value, I think, for teams is they've got the medical evaluations. And so they can, if a guy had an injury 3 years ago, they can go look at that. The NFL will do their tests. Each team is allowed to do whatever tests they want on somebody medically. So that can kind of raise red flags or that can calm nerves that, okay, this guy is past that injury. He should be fine. And then the other part of it is, the teams, they get 60 interviews with prospects that can last up to 15 minutes each. Those are the formal interviews that people always hear about. And that gives them the chance to, hey, this guy's got a sketchy background. We want to find out why was he arrested or why didn't he get along with a coach or anything like that? Or we're not sure if a guy coming from, let's say, the air raid that Cliff Kingsbury ran in college, can he be smart enough to pick up what we need him to do in our NFL offense? And so they'll put him on, a whiteboard and say, okay, tell me your favorite play and what was your responsibility? And they get a chance to kind of get into the football acumen that a player has. And so I think between the medicals and the interviews, those are the two most important things for teams at the Combine.
Cool stuff. We'll be back next week with more from the Viking Update Show. Also check out the Jeff Diamond Vikings and NFL Insider, and we'll have that out again next week. Thanks to everybody who's listening to TalkNorth.com. Thanks to Brandon, and we will talk to you next week.